All right. I've done a lot of customizations to ITV2 at Beth Israel. I've talked about some of that in previous years. Today I'm going to talk specifically about the data export process at BI. It's meant to be a contrast to what you've seen earlier here on the built-in export capabilities in 1.8.3. And part of the purpose of this is you saw how Recover worked a little bit different than what's in open source ITB2. And we expect probably in most places, there'll be certain customizations, integrations, other things when you really get into a production versions of this. So it's hard to build something that will work at all sites. So we have an ITB2, a general, sort of generic version of a workflow, handling of emails and data export, but it may look very different at your institution. And I'll just illustrate as a contrast how we handle it here. The goal here was to automate this as much as possible rather than having admins review pieces. And so there's a lot of integration. On the left is I2B2. We brand this at Beth Israel as two different I2B2 tools, an I2B2 aggregate query tool, which is I2B2, and something else called the I2B2 data download tool. And that's not really I2B2. That's a whole custom application that we built over at Beth Israel. And these two things work together. When you log on to I2B2, you choose which of these two tools you want to use. If you click aggregate query tool, you go into regular I2B2. You can build aggregate queries. Those pull data from your CRC star schema tables and save the queries to the QT tables. That's technical. That's how it stores it there. And then normally you would go through I2B2 to do the export, but again, here we have this separate data download tool. And I'll show some more details. This is just a high-level overview of it. You log into that using a Microsoft authentication at Beth Israel. So it's already using a sort of a internal resource at BI. Then it connects to Beth Israel's IRB system, and it sees which protocols you have, and you check off the protocol you want to use. So that's kind of the validation step that an administrator might normally do, but here we're able to automate that. Then you get a choice. You have to select a set of patients. You can either upload your own custom list of medical record numbers, or you can go and query those QT tables in I2B2 to select the previous query that you ran. So either way is kind of a valid way of defining your list of patients. Then there's a set of options on what you want to include in your data download. And then those options get pushed to a stored procedure that sits on top of the I2B2 database that will generate the files. It doesn't actually create physical files. It generates a blob of data for the file and stores it inside of a database. It's not an I2B2 table. It's separate tables that we created, and it's stored as blobs in those tables. And then the user is shown a web page that says your files are ready to download. Click here and download it. And when you click that, the website pulls the blob out of the database, and the data gets stored to the user's device or file share or wherever they're putting it. There's Beth Israel policies that describe where you can store data. So they can't just put this on whatever unencrypted computer. They have to download the data to a secure place, but we're kind of leaving it to them to solve that problem rather than providing them infrastructure on where to install the information. So this is what the login screen looks like in I2B2 at Beth Israel. There's some introduction, background, and it has the two buttons for the aggregate query tool and the data download tool. The aggregate query tool goes to a 1.8 I2B2 web client, and the data download tool goes to this custom application at Beth Israel. When you go into the data download tool, you scroll down, then it shows you the list of protocols you have. This is a specific workflow that they wanted to do at Beth Israel. By default, only the PI of a protocol is allowed to download the data. The PI, though, can log into I2B2, there's a link that says authorize. And when they click that, they see the list of all the other investigators on that protocol, and they can check off the members of their team who should be allowed to download data. They click authorize, and now those additional people can come in, select the protocol, and download the data. So this is really replacing the manager capability and the project capability inside of I2B2, because it's already kind of handled in the IRB system. The protocol lists who the PI is, and that's the manager, and all the investigators on the protocol are the other members of that team. So this is the manager going in here saying these are all the people who can access the data download tool under this protocol. So it's providing similar kind of functionality that you heard before, but it's leveraging another system to do that. After you select your protocol, then you go down to defining a cohort. And here's a search form. You can either search for a previous query that you ran. So it'll list the queries, the number of patients set the match, the dates, things you selected. Or there's a link where you can upload a list of medical record numbers. At Beth Israel, we recently merged 15 different healthcare hospitals and clinical units. Each of these places had their own local medical record numbers before merging into Epic. So the data upload tool is asking you what type of medical record number you're loading. Is it a historical Beth Israel medical record number or a new Beth Israel Lehi Epic medical record number? And it'll do that mapping and figure out the correct list of I2B2 patient noms for your cohort. Then there's a set of export options. You're supposed to do what your IRB protocol states. We don't somehow, no one's reviewing it to enforce it, but you select between identifiable data where there's an actual medical record number or a limited data set where certain things are stripped out or de-identified data. You have a couple choices of how you want things grouped, but really what you're downloading is a long, skinny text file, like an export of the facts in the I2B2 observation fact table. This was kind of copied off of how things at MGB originally worked. And, Sean told me once, I remember this, how investigators think they know what data elements they need, but they always come back and they want more things. So we thought it'd be helpful to just like dump everything out. So every laboratory test, medication, diagnosis of the patients come in these download files. So once you get all that data out of I2B2, you can load it into R, SAS, and you have everything you need. But investigators hate this. If you have cancer patients, renal patients, you get gigabytes of data out, and they don't know how to use it. They go, I just want to have one row per patient, and this and this and this. And that's the new custom data export formats that we have in 1.8.2 and 1.8.3 now. So now that those are out, I'm going to be bringing that in to I2B2. So in the aggregate query tool, you would also, using the plugin, have to design what kind of tables you want, the rows and the columns, and then the data download tool would take those the table definitions and allow people to have additional download formats. The last thing they have to do is sign this attestation. So there's a bunch of things they wanted the investigators to check off, that they're only requesting things that were listed in their IRB, that they're going to save the data to a secure location. Again, we don't have an admin in this process that's confirming all of this. It's trusting the investigators to follow the internal Beth Israel policies. Then they click the button, and then the list of files show up. There's separate files for each data domain, a diagnosis one, a laboratory test one, for example. They download those, and each of those are tab delimited text files that are sort of basically extracts of the I2B2 dimension tables with certain columns removed or swapped out based on what the identifiability parameters were set as. And that was the end of that. Do you have questions on how we do this here? There's, again, there's a lot of parallels to the built-in components inside of I2B2, but it's automating everything by linking to different systems within Beth Israel and sort of trusting the investigators at a level that other institutions may want to have a manual review of.
Great work, Griffin. Question, how in sync is the I2B2 export with changes that are happening in the Epic medical record system? So if they add new fields to Epic, is it a real-time update with the I2B2, or is it a custom update that you need to do to make sure, say if you wanted all the things for a patient that are stored in Epic, how real-time is that?
I'm only bringing in a small fraction of all the types of stuff that's inside of Epic. So Boodle is like 1,000 tables, and I'm maybe touching 30 of them. But it's the ones that are the most commonly requested. There's the diagnoses, all the procedures, the laboratory tests, many, many things once you get into different kinds of specialties that I'm not importing over here. So at Beth Israel, if an investigator needs a data element that's not in here, they have Epic tools like Slicer Dicer and Data Hub and other things. So when you download this, you're getting everything that's in I2B2. I'm often adding things in based on new things that were added into Epic or things that were based on user requests, but it's always going to be a small fraction of the number of data elements, but it might be a large fraction of the total quantity of data on patients, because the most common things are going to be in here. John had a great paper a number of years ago where it's looking at what are the most common things people query on. So, if you have to, you can start planning, I'm going to build an I2B2 that's going to bring everything from Epic in. It'll just never happen. But, there's certain things, diagnoses, demographics, medications, that it's kind of a hierarchy of things that people are querying on. So you kind of get to a point where it's good enough and it's going to have value to people and can release it. And then over time, you can work with investigators to prioritize what comes afterwards. One thing we hadn't, in many years running this at Beth Israel, we hadn't loaded vaccines in. I really hadn't had investigators request that. But from Mass CPR, that's a hugely important component. So that was one of the newest items that we now load in. Yes.
Griffin, this is great. Thank you very much. That's very interesting how you created that. And I think one of the key things you have in there is the ability to connect with the IRB protocol and see who is still involved in a project, that type of thing. I'm wondering, is that something where, as far as you know, most institutions have that kind of API or something available to connect with their
Well,
IRB?
I'm pretty sure no other institution has this particular, this is a homegrown thing. It has Beth Israel specific naming on it. So it's nothing where if I kind of release the code, someone's going to be able to use it. But most institutions have authentication systems, have IRB systems. So kind of what the point of this is there's an I2B2 platform, and we have various tools for generating data sets and managing accounts. But you may have to take I2B2 and build your own custom hooks to really get this into a production system where you can scale it out to hundreds of users and projects.
Like, for example, if someone was able to connect to their IRB and pick out like the protocols that are available and the users associated with those, and then even have information on if these people still have their HIPAA training current and that type of thing.
Right. So like Mitch was showing earlier, the admin tools for creating projects and the people in the project. You can have an ETL process that updated that automatically from an IRB system. I don't know how many institutions have the ability to do that. Sometimes groups are siloed, so the people who are running I2B2 have no access to the research administration tools. I was very fortunate to know the right people and be able to implement this here, but there may just be lots of different barriers to getting this to work.
Very encouraging to see that. Thank you very much.
Yeah. All right, I think we need to move to the next. Thank you.